Welcome to Blockchain Security Series, the podcast where the future of Web3 security unfolds. Presented by pablito.eth.
Hello and welcome. I am Pablo Sabbatella, your guide through the intricate and evolving world of blockchain security. Each episode we dive deep into the heart of Web3, bringing you face-to-face with the pioneers and key players shaping the blockchain security ecosystem. Hello everyone, welcome to the Blockchain Security Series, episode 14. Today we have a very special guest, Frederik Svantes, a security research lead at Ethereum Foundation. How are you, Frederik? Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Pablo. I'm really good. Summer is active in Sweden, so everything is good.
Okay, great. Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. We have many topics to discuss today. But well, sometimes here we start from the beginning, right? So to start off, I want to ask you, how did you get started into computers and programming? And how was this then connected with crypto?
So I got into computers at a very young age. I spent a lot of my school years in the computer hall / room that we had at my school, where you were able to, go online and you could do various things. I felt that it was a really cool way to connect with people from all across the world, and getting to see their experiences and so forth. I kind of got into the let's say the dark side of the internet as well, in the sense of getting excited about things like hacking, phreaking, and other things that were kind of exciting to look into as a young person. And there were a lot of people who were like super skilled and super excited, so I always looked up to them and kind of tried to learn as much as I could. So basically, I spent a lot of time during my childhood looking into these kind of things. And then after high school, I joined Blizzard Entertainment, working on World of Warcraft, and that allowed me to pretty much use my passion as my work, which was super exciting.
Nice, yeah, and it's funny that you were providing support, right, at Blizzard for World of Warcraft. That is the same game that Vitalik used to play, and the reason why he created Ethereum, right? After his character was weakened by the company or something like that.
Yeah, his mage. Yeah, so I started as in-game support for World of Warcraft. Moved to Paris to do that. But I did that for a kind of short period. We were growing a lot. We started with about 30 people. And then after World of Warcraft launched, we grew and grew. And I think at the top we were like 2,000 people or something like that. So pretty soon afterwards, I started to, instead of doing game support, I ran a team which did database analytics. So what we did was we crunched all the data that came from the game, and there was a lot of data that was being stored when people did certain actions in game and so forth. And then we analyzed that to kind of try to find people that were misbehaving. Like, there was a big issue with people doing in-game gold farming, for example, where they would set up bots and then sell that through various websites. So we tried to track those and create systems to kind of figure out who those people were. And we also looked at things like when people got scammed or hacked, how did that happen, what happened with the stolen funds, etc. And then we also did some analytics on things like if certain skills were too powerful and other things. So we looked at all of those things, and then we kind of took actions on various parts and relayed some parts to other teams. But I mean, yeah, at the time I didn't know that the changes that were being done would have such a big impact on not just my life, but thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people throughout the world that are now using Ethereum. So I think that's interesting.
Nice. And you mentioned that when you started, you were like you started to connect with the, let's say, dark side of the internet, hacking, freaking, and all that. Was that around like 1999 or 2000, like the Kill the Cow 2016 magazine and all that era?
Yeah, yeah. So that was around that time. There were a lot of e-signs being created.
Yeah.
I was very young, but I was writing for one of the e-signs,
Yeah.
a Swedish one. Yeah, it's
I I had the biggest repository of e-signs
oh,
in the year 2000. I had created it. Yeah, I
nice.
remember.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. That's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, I remember that time.
Um, so yeah, I was super excited about that, and I think for me that was a time when it felt like anything was possible. Everything was kind of pure. People were doing things and exploring things because it was fun and exciting. It wasn't about, making a big amount of profit and so forth. When, as I grew older, that kind of shifted in the Web2 space, where, a lot of companies popped up and a lot of them were making, they were focused on making money, both by selling services, but also on things like, activities by people, understanding how people behaved and then selling that information. Um, and I didn't. So after Blizzard, I joined another company which worked as a service provider. But I didn't really feel that it was like the same thing as when I was young. So in the end, you know, I guess we're kind of jumping now, but when I found out when I found the Ethereum ecosystem, I had the same kind of feeling as I had back in '98, in the '98 era, where people were like super excited about the technology and what you can do, and not so much about only making money, but also thinking about things like how can we use this for public good, how can we kind of help make the world a better place by doing this, and that's kind of what drew me into Ethereum eventually.
Nice. Well, you have lots of background in operational security and Web2 security, right? You led a team of security engineer and analysts working with blue and red team activities, right? So could you tell us a bit more, like, what's a red team? What's a blue team? How do they work together? A bit about your experience there.
Yeah, yeah. So after Blizzard, this was in 2009. I joined a European service provider company that provided services primarily to, let's say, critical infrastructure, as in like airports, payment providers, airline companies, shipping companies, national banks, governmental entities, and so forth. And of course, these types of entities have very high security requirements. So part of the offering was providing security as a service to them as well. And to do that, we created a security team, security operations center, which were tasked of dealing with incoming incidents, as in triaging and sorting out the actual incidents. And then we kind of grew that into also having a red team, which was responsible for doing the penetration testing activities that we were doing both internally and for these entities. It's to me, those things are super interesting. I think there are so many things to learn. Like during an incident, you always learn something new. I think it's, and that's something that I truly value myself. Part of the reason I'm so excited about Ethereum is that there is always new things coming. Like you can never be fully learned, and it's the same with an incident. Whenever there's an incident, you learn something new, and it's kind of interesting how it's kind of similar in Web 2 and Web 3 when it comes to incident handling, but it's also completely different in the sense that in Web 2, at least where I come from, everything was super well prepared, as in, you would have various functions working with the incident handling. People that were doing the triaging, the security engineers, the comms people. You would have people that were able to make tough calls. But in Web 3, it's a bit more, at least from my experience, a bit more floating, as in incidents tend to be solved, and they tend to be solved quite efficient. But a lot of the time, there aren't really. It's not as structured, I would say. There are perhaps not as much preparation done. So there is a bit of a risk where, in the beginning of an incident, people don't really know what to do, and that can take some time away from valuable. It can take away valuable time, which could be spent on better things. So perhaps that's something that I would promote to think a bit more before it actually happens.
Yeah, totally. To have more procedures and to be ready to say like, hey, when something happens, we have to create a war room. Who has to be there? Who do we have to talk to first? The other day I published a tweet saying that I had to contact a company. In fact, it happens very usually, and lots of Web3 projects and companies don't have a security contact in their website, right? Like a security at yourdomain.com or something similar, like to say,
Yeah.
hey, there's an emergency. Who should we talk to? Some of those things are not yet working, but we'll talk about.
I
Yeah.
agree. I think there are things kind of missing today, which would be kind of easy to do. Like you mentioned, like just something like security at domain.com, using what has been a standard in Web 2 for a very long time, such as the security.txt, which is just a txt file explaining what to do if you find something, adding a security.md file on GitHub to kind of tell people how to reach out, opening up the ability to submit vulnerability reports on GitHub would also be helpful. And also, like you mentioned, the procedure thing, I think, it's impossible to. I think it's a kind of a waste of time to try to think about every possible incident that can happen, because even if you think about 100 of them, it's probably going to be something that you didn't write down that's going to happen. It's very hard to anticipate everything, but I think as long as you kind of write down contact ways, who is responsible for what, and you kind of practice that, I think you're most likely be able to tackle everything at that point. So I think it's more important to write down kind of procedures and not actually writing down how to solve every single incident.
Yeah, I agree. And connecting with that, like incident response, right? I would like to go a bit deeper about your experience there. And how much of the things that you plan are actually useful and used during an emergency? And how many of them are not really that useful then? And connecting with that, right? What do you think that Web3 should learn from incident response from Web2, if there's something that we should learn, right? Because
Yeah.
it's an industry with much, much more years.
Yeah, I think one of the key things is to be able to stay calm, especially during the early stages of an incident, and not go into panic mode. And I think the easiest way to be able to achieve that is to have a clear structure of what you're going to do during an incident, and also to have practiced that a few times. So in Web 2, you would call that, like very commonly, is disaster recovery exercise. So you would come up with a scenario, and then you would kind of practice, do a dry run on that to see what happens. It's not so much about solving an actual incident, it's more about getting people to understand what their role is during an incident, so that people can focus on what, directly when an incident happens, that you're responsible for X and I'm responsible for Y, and this other person is responsible for Z. And that is something that it very much helps to, at the start of the incident, to kind of figure that out, and to have that, and especially having practiced it, so you're not just coming into it without knowing exactly what to do. This is something that in Web 2, especially if you have like ISO 27001 or SOC 2 or whatever else that you have as a certification, or that you're following, like PCI DSS or stuff like that, very often you will run one of these exercises once a year with all the stakeholders to kind of make sure that you are prepared, and you would take a different type of incident each time. And I think that's something that's is valuable. Like in Web 2, maybe you would have one incident being, okay, all of our credit card data was stolen 1 year, and then the next year you would be our primary data center burnt down. How do we get back into service, etc.? And I think in Web 3 it's possible to do that as well. But in Web 2, you very often also have these policy documents that explain these things and standards. I think there are pros and cons with that. If you are an entity and you're following PCI DSS, for example, like if you're a payment provider, you have to follow PCI DSS. The issue, though, is that by following these standards and doing everything that it says, it's very hard to be innovative, because you have so many rules and regulations that you have to follow, and it becomes very, very slow to do things. So for a Web3 startup, I wouldn't recommend to do something like that. I would recommend to do something more agile. But just speaking within the team and figuring out who's going to do what when we have an incident, and doing some type of practice run once a year, I don't think that takes a lot of time or effort. And I think whenever that incident then happens, it's going to pay itself back many, many times, because people are going to be able to be calm. They can push out the information that they might have prepared or not, but they will be able to do things in a more calmer way than they would otherwise. So that would be my key takeaway.
Yeah, I agree. And one question, when you used to do these exercises, right? Were they always planned? Like on July 13 at 4 p.m., we are going to do this exercise? Or sometimes there were some surprise things, right? Because incidents happen when you don't expect them. Like a Saturday at 4 a.m.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So we did a mix of both, actually. We did some that were planned. And then we did some unplanned. I think you need to be a bit, like, one of the ones that I did was perhaps not super super nice, but I did one the day after Christmas, or the night after Christmas. It worked out fine, but you probably want to be a bit sensitive at least.
Yeah, they didn't love you.
Yeah. But But it's good. Like, if people don't expect it, it's very interesting to see what they're doing. Like, sometimes, like in a few cases, we had a scenario. We went to the people that were, going to be part of this incident management, and they actually believed it very well. Like, they thought this was an actual thing until we went into the physical war room as we had it. And they saw that this was just an exercise. I think that's probably how you want to do it. Like, you want to have a real scenario, like a potentially real scenario, so that people can kind of think that this could actually happen. But yeah, doing a mix, I think is good. Like, or at least telling people that this week during office hours, something might happen. Or
Yeah.
I think it's probably more valuable, or the most valuable thing is to get them into a room, getting them to run through the exercise and understand their roles. I think that's probably the most important thing here. I don't think getting them to wake up at 4 a.m. is probably not the most important thing. Because they will do that in any case. But it's, sometimes it can be interesting, sometimes it can be not as useful.
Yeah, totally. Something interesting that I saw in a talk from Daniel Bonfange some weeks ago, that he was talking about incident response, saying that when you are in those kind of emergency situations, it's very common to make mistakes, right?
Yeah.
So something that he recommended was to say, okay, before you're gonna do, like, never do something before communicating to everyone else. Like, I am gonna do this way, so that everyone has let's say, the opportunity to say, hey, no, stop, don't do that for some reason. So I think that, being calm is also very important. More in Web3, right? Because, like, you can always make things worse.
Yeah, I think that's why it's important to have this war room, right? I think having depending on how severe the issue is, of course, but if it's a very severe or critical issue, it's probably more valuable to do a video call or something like that instead of just chat. Because, like you say, if you do a chat, it's easy to you can just do something on your own and then write it after the fact. But if you're in a video call, it's very easy to just say, well, I'm gonna do this now. And then someone might say, okay, well, maybe that's not the best idea. And also, it's possible for you to say, maybe it's time to make another communication update now, for example. I think the communication part is probably quite interesting as well to discuss. I think there are two ways to go wrong. One is to not communicate enough, and one is to communicate too fast. The first one, if you don't communicate at all, I mean, users or customers in Web2, they would become worried, like, what is going on, what's happening. And the same with users in Web3, like, they want to know that something is happening. At the same time, if you're communicating too fast, you might say something which turns out not to be factual in the end. And that can actually be quite damaging, because if people don't really trust what you're saying, then they might not, I mean, that can hurt your communication moving forward. So you have to do something in between where, once you have some facts, you should relay that. But you should also relay at a fixed interval. Like, perhaps you have, let's say you have you run a big entity and there's an incident. Probably you want to have at least internal communication, an internal communication update, maybe once every 30 minutes or something. Maybe you want to have an external one every hour or whatever. I think it's important to follow that, even if the update there is no additional updates, like something so people can actually see we're still working on this, but we don't have any actual new facts to relay yet. But as soon as we have, we will update that. And I think that's valuable to actually do in Web3 as well.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I think that also something very important are like postmortems, right? Like to be very, very clear on what happened. Last week we were doing a talk here in a conference about the biggest 25 Web3 attacks, and most of them didn't have like a good postmortem, and lots of companies also like do not share exactly what happened, right? Because perhaps they are ashamed or whatever, but there is a lot of knowledge that wasn't shared, or perhaps it's even worse because sometimes like they don't know what hit them, right? What happened, right? More in like Web2 style attacks.
I mean, I think that's if you don't know what hit you, that's probably the worst situation you can be in, because
Yep.
then you don't know if the fixes you did actually solved it, and make sure that they can't get back in. Um, I definitely think the postmortem is super valuable, not only for the public but also for your internal use, to make sure like seeing what can you do better in the future and what can you do to avoid this from happening again. Sometimes it's out of your control, but sometimes it's something that you can do something about. But it's hard. Like just to take a recent incident that happened where I was involved, where we had so there's a blog called blog.ethereum.org, which is running. Well, it's posting up various updates. You can subscribe to that blog, and you will receive an email when there is something relevant that comes up. Usually, it's about things such as a new client update or something like that. So the mailing list provider that was being used all of a sudden started sending out some phishing email, and we were looking into what happened. We couldn't see anything on our side. We couldn't see anything on the mailing list provider side. So it was extremely hard to figure out what exactly happened. We managed to shut this down very, very quickly because we just we stopped it. We stopped the mailing list provider from being able to send emails in that name by changing or removing DNS entries, basically. But then after we fixed it, and that's basically the important thing, right? As an incident, make sure that you prevent the current attack and then start investigating how this happened, etc. In this case, it turned out that Google actually had a vulnerability on their side. So someone was able to bypass a security check at Google Workspace in order to gain access into the mailing list service provider. And that's not something that's, it's very hard for someone to prevent that, unless they're Google, of course. But as an external user, you can't, it's very hard to do. But of course, there are learnings to be made, such as maybe you should turn off SSO and other things to kind of help prevent this. But that kind of incident is very hard to kind of foresee, and that's it goes back to where I said about like trying to figure out whatever incidents you're gonna have is probably not super fruitful, because you're gonna have incidents that don't really match with that. Yeah,
I totally agree. So going back, it's connected with this to Web2, right? You have also a pretty big background in operational security, Web2 security. What do you think about the current state of operational security in the blockchain ecosystem today? Like, personally, my opinion is you see that I don't know if, most projects don't have a CISO or a security or a person in charge of security. So, what do you think about this, right? There's like this thing about like blockchain is very secure, cryptography it's also very, very secure. But if we don't use it in a proper way, it's a big issue. In fact, like 80% of funds lost in the last year are not smart contract hacks, but it's everything. Like most of that is private key being leaked, right? Compromised. So what do you think about all this Web 2 and operational security aspect?
Yeah, so I think like in the early days, I think it probably made sense to focus on let's say Web3 security as in smart contract, right? Making sure the smart contracts were super like written securely. Because in the beginning, it felt to me like this was something that was lacking. Like there was a lot of smart contracts that were being exploited and so forth. I think today we are at we're in a better place, like you say, with regards to that. I think there are more resources that developers can follow. There are more libraries that are written in a secure way. There are more guardrails as well with the compilers and so forth that help prevent this. So I think it makes sense to shift focus a bit now towards like the Web 2-ish operational security part, and that's like it's a very, very big area, I think. For a project, there are things that are highly relevant when it comes to the front end, for example. Like how have you secured your front end? Which domain registrar are you at? Is it as trusted and secure registrar? Which DNS provider are you using? Which cloud provider are you using? And how have you secured the cloud environments? Like a lot of in Web 2, there are like whole businesses or areas within security that only focus on cloud security. And some entities will specialize in AWS security, some in Azure security, some in GC security, etc. And there are so many different security tools available at these cloud providers. I am not really sure if all of that is being utilized or thought about in the Web3 space in the way it probably should be, given the amount of funds that are at stake. So that area is definitely something that should be focused on, like the infrastructure side. I think there are other sides as well, like you mentioned, the private keys, for example. Just things like best practices with regards to how to handle private keys and, when should multisigs be used, when should hardware wallets be used, etc. I think this also goes a bit back to what we talked about regarding PCI DSS. Like, it wouldn't make sense for a 2-person startup to go ahead and implement, I don't know, some HSM for handling the, private keys or, focus all of their power into making the front end like super, super secure. But it probably makes sense, like when you have like millions of dollars in TVL, you probably should be thinking about it. And it probably makes sense to add someone to the team who has awareness of that. Because that person, like you mentioned, a CISO, for example, I'm not sure if CISO is the right thing to add to a team, but I think someone with experience with security, they will at least be able to see the potential risks of a project and be able to kind of raise those and say, I think there is a risk with the GitHub repository, for example. I think there is a risk with the front end or whatever, and maybe it's time to move away from using just online private key to hardware wallets with multisigs, etc. And the same with like the developer setups, for example. And I guess that's another completely different area where in Web 2, a lot of companies will say, okay, welcome to the job. Here's your laptop. It's completely controlled by the enterprise. Personally, I do not like that at all. Like I'm not a fan of that setup. But I do think that people need to at least become aware of the threats so that they can understand and, work according to the risk level that they're in. Like if you are a developer at a project which has millions of TVL in it, then maybe you shouldn't just, open a file from a random person that says they want to hire you and run it on your work computer. Especially if you have your private keys on that computer, etc. And I think that kind of security awareness is probably something that, should become a bit better in this space as well.
Yeah, yeah. I totally agree. Yeah, I think that it's very important to be aware of what can happen to you, right? And what I also see is that we are having like two types of attacks. Let's say sometimes you see things that are really sophisticated, but you also see sometimes very basic things, right? That you cannot believe that have happened. Well, now going. Let's go to.
I think the security awareness is just something that, like, making that specific to who you are. I think is very important. Like in Web 2, for example, we would, you would do a security awareness that's tailored to what your specific role is. Like, imagine if you're a developer, then you're likely to face certain risks that someone in communication is probably not going to face. And I think that's probably key to making this relevant and interesting to people. Because something that is a potential risk or vulnerability for someone who works in communication is probably going to be completely different from someone who works as a developer. So I would probably do something like that as well. Like make sure that, you kind of look at the different angles of what your role is and seeing and kind of think about how could someone exploit what I'm doing in order to gain something that they shouldn't be having.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, in fact, when I do like security awareness talks or some audit, like I always try. I learned that the best way for people to pay attention to learn is like to tell stories that are related to them, right? If you're a developer, okay, there's gonna be a recruiter coming to you. They're gonna make you 3 or 4 interviews, and in the last one, they're gonna send you a PDF or some package to install and whatever, and you're done. You are a founder, they are gonna tell you they're from a VC and they want to invest and this and this and this. You are an influencer. A reporter from Forbes will tell you that they want to do an interview, but it's very important, like to people connect to more with these stories when you show them that it's real.
Yeah, for sure. Like if you're in finance, you might fall victim to a CEO scam where someone says, I am the CEO, send money to this account because I need it now, and so forth. It seems like a lot of people say like, well, that's obvious. I'm never gonna fall for that. But there are very intelligent people that have been tricked, and there's been cases now where people have been using AI to look as if they're talking with an entire room, like a boardroom, and it's getting harder and harder to kind of figure this out. So yeah.
Yeah, and connected with this, like most people think it's not gonna happen to me. I think that there are two things there. First is that now with social engineering, depending on who you are, scammers and attackers take all the time that they need. I saw one case some weeks ago where they infected a developer like after 4 interviews, right? He had 4 calls with real people, with video, with all that. You say, okay, they gained trust. That's it. And the second thing is that most of the times that these people are compromised, they don't say anything, right? If you're a developer working for a company and another company was trying to hire you and you were compromised, you're not gonna tell your employer, right? And that's very, 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 very dangerous too. And lots of people are also ashamed, so they don't say anything. So we are having more social engineering attacks than people think or see, right?
Yeah, I mean, when we did the red teaming, I would say, if social engineering was allowed, that was, the very easy way of getting in. Like,
Yeah.
you would, like, there was a 100% success rate with the cases that I worked on, like through social engineering. It's fairly easy to do it, as long as you have a convincing story, etc. And depending on what you want to do, of course. But it could be just getting into an office, for example, and being able to connect something to the office network. It's a lot easier to just speak with someone outside who is smoking and then tailgating them in and going through the gates, etc., than it is to compromise the the lock system and getting access that way. Same way with getting access to a system that you shouldn't have access to by saying that you're a new employee or whatever. So yeah, the social engineering aspect is probably one of the most important things, I think, to consider.
Yeah, there's a phrase that I love that says something like beginners hack systems, professionals hack people, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
And it's
exactly.
far more fun.
I mean, it's like one of the big things that I think, like one of the big issues today in this space is the amount of, people falling victims to drainers.
Yeah.
And that is also a type of social engineering, right? It's more of an automated way, I guess, but in the sense where people are promised something by taking some action and then doing it, and then something bad happens in the end, which, in this case, it's their funds are being stolen. But they are kind of prying on the same thing of people trusting people. And it's certainly something that should be surfaced a bit more, explaining that not everyone is doing things for your interest. You should be thinking a bit about what kind of consequence could it have, etc.
Yeah, totally. So, well, let's talk about a bit about today. Tell us a bit about your role at the Ethereum Foundation. What's your role? What do you do? How does a typical day look like?
Sure. So I lead the protocol security team. We're a team of I would say about 10 people. We have probably 6 people who work full time, and then we have 4 people who have a few different roles on top of their security role. Like we have some people who are developers, and then we have a cryptographer, and we I guess the core of it is that we try to ensure the security of the Ethereum network, which is the underlying network, the base layer. We don't focus on the dApp layer or like the user layer so much, but it's the underlying network that allows people to use their dApps and so forth. A lot of it is doing manual auditing on the different clients that exist, such as Lodestar or Teku, Besu, Prism, or Lighthouse. We look at the code bases for those, try to find issues, especially around hard forks. Then we also do a lot of automated fuzzing, write fuzzers and run them, basically to be able to augment the manual audits, because it's there are so many clients written in so many languages that it's extremely hard to kind of have time to manually audit the code continuously. So we have to do some more automated stuff. So we write and use private and public fuzzers. And then we also spend a lot of time on coordinating security. I would say that is probably one of the key things that we do. We act as security coordinators within the space, meaning that we help coordinate security between the client teams, between the different parts of the ecosystem that care and work with protocol security. We also run the bug bounty program, which is available at bounty.ethereum.org. It has and that has the protocol in scope, basically.
So how does the EF bug bounty program work? Like, and what are the challenges that you face when you manage it for Ethereum, right? Especially coordinating through these different clients.
Yeah, so we run the program ourselves. Basically, people can go to the website, they can report an issue, and then we triage it and we relay it to the affected clients and try to work with them to kind of figure out a way to fix this. It is the same as, we find a lot of issues ourselves. But the difference, of course, here is that it's from an external person, so we coordinate with that person, and we also pay out, a bounty to the person who reported a valid issue. I would say, it's extremely good. It's something that augments the other things that we do very well. We do have quite a few reports, and we have them public in a GitHub repository, like all the previous reports that we have received. We publish them on a GitHub repository after each hard fork, so that people can look at them and kind of try to figure out what type of vulnerabilities they should be looking for, and maybe get some ideas on how to find them.
Nice. And you used to have bounties for the execution layer and the consensus layer, right? And then both programs were merged. How did you arrive to that decision?
So originally Bounty.ethereum.org was launched in 2015 even. And that was naturally about the execution layer because that's all that existed at the time. Then came the consensus layer, and the consensus layer was not as mature as the execution layer at the time, so it was decided to keep them separate, mainly from a reward point of view and others, and a point, we have a leaderboard and we didn't want to mix the points either, because as the consensus layer was developed, it was very new. It had a lot of clients had a lot of issues when they were being created. So at the time we kept them separated, and then after the merge, they it made more and more sense to merge the bug bounty programs as well, because at that time the clients were mature. They worked together with the EL clients. So at that time, we decided to merge them together. We still keep a separate leaderboard, though, one for the consensus layer and one for the execution layer.
And what are the most common type of vulnerabilities that are reported? Do they impact the network?
The most common one is denial of service attacks. So, issues where you could, for example, send a network packet to a specific client, and that client might crash. Or you might send something to a client and it will use a ton of CPU time to do it. And if you send a lot of them, the client will stop responding. This is definitely the most common thing, but it's perhaps not the the worst thing, because if it's quite easy to recover from it. Like if there is a denial of service attack in a client, then the clients affected might go down, but it's probably going to be pretty easy to figure out how was this attack executed, and deploy or release a new version which fixes it, and have the clients update, and that's it. They will be back online, and most likely, from a network or user point of view, no one will have noticed anything. It's worse if it's a consensus issue, and that's the second most common thing. Because if there is a consensus issue, and for some reason this isn't really spotted immediately, then that could have pretty bad consequences. Because if an exchange decide to follow the chain that isn't the actual chain, or the chain that's gonna become finalized, and they do various things there, then that could have quite negative impact on that exchange, for example, and that would be a bit harder to recover from, because that could have more consequences. So that's something that we care a bit more about.
Great. Now let's talk a bit about communication in security and public disclosure, right? So how is the vulnerability disclosure process, and which are the different phases, right? And can you share any insights or lessons learned from the past regarding this?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I guess first of all, the Ethereum Foundation runs the bug bounty program, but how vulnerabilities are dealt with is pretty much up to the clients themselves to decide on. We will relay the information, and then different clients have kind of different tactics on how to do this. We do care about the security of the network, of course, so we might give suggestions, but at the end of the day, it's up to the clients to decide how they want to do it. Most of them, though, will issue a silent patch where they will embed it. They will embed the fix in just a release without mentioning that there is a security fix in it. And then after a certain amount of time, they might say, you should at least upgrade to this version, after they believe enough people have had time to update. And then after another set of time, they might say, okay, now we release a public advisory that there is an issue here. That's like I said, it's not really clear how each client team does it, but so far we haven't had any issues. What we do, though, like I mentioned, we have the public repository, so that is the latest time we will update or release disclosure about it, which is after each hard fork, because after each hard fork, we are sure that everyone has updated to a version that has the fix, basically. Before that, we don't really know how big of a percentage of the network has updated to the fixed version of Prism, for example, or Lighthouse, or whatever. But at the hard fork, we know that in order to follow the hard fork, you would have had to update. So at that time, it's safe to release the information.
Excellent. So you also have the Ethereum protocol has an Attackathon, right, with Immunefi. Which were the objectives of this initiative, and how was it complementary to the bug bounties that you are actually running?
So we're going to run a Attackathon, or a bug bounty competition, which is basically a time-boxed competition. The way that works is that there is a prize pool, of say $2 million. And at the end of the competition, that pool is divided out to people depending on certain criteria, like was there a critical vulnerability found, or was there only low vulnerabilities found, etc. The way it works is that it's kind of similar to a bug bounty program, but it's time boxed. Meaning that you, for 8 weeks, you just find as much issues as you can, you report them, and then, you know, if you report something that's valuable, you're gonna get something, but the amount you receive depends on how many other people found issues, basically. So if you're the only one who found a critical vulnerability, you're gonna get like a very, gonna get a bigger percentage of the pot compared to others. But if you only find a low vulnerability, then you will, if you find a low vulnerability but 10 other people find criticals, then that's going to have an impact on the amount you receive as well. But it's, like you say, it's a way to augment the bug bounty program, which is then augmenting the manual audits and the fuzzing. So it's just a matter of like finding new ways to kind of maximize the findings of vulnerabilities. I see it as very valuable from multiple sides. I think one side is obviously that, hopefully you will receive a lot of vulnerabilities during that time that can then be fixed before someone malicious exploit them. But it's also a matter of making sure that helping people become educated in protocol security work, because that is a very niche area right now. A lot of people focus on Solidity security, for example, looking at smart contracts and so forth. But to look at security from a protocol point of view is it's quite complex. It takes a lot of time to understand it. And to be honest, there hasn't been that many resources available yet when it comes to getting people to understand how to look at protocol from a security point of view. So that's something that we're also gonna do, which will hopefully, mean that instead of having, 20 people looking into protocol security and reporting things through the bug bounty program, we can hopefully increase that to like 100 people. And I think that is probably gonna be super relevant to, not only the base layer, but for the whole ecosystem. You see these DApp projects, which has, bug bounty programs saying that they will pay 10 millions or $15 million or whatever. I think, that can certainly make sense if you have so much funds at stake. But the issue is a bit also, imagine if there's a critical vulnerability on the base layer. If that happens, the $10 million bounty hasn't really helped there. Imagine if there is a critical vulnerability on the base layer, which allows the minting of ETH without, being a validator, for example. Imagine if you can just start minting ETH. You can create 10 ETH every second. If you can do that, you could destroy so many projects. You could just basically dump prices and, cause havoc. And that's going to have a big effect on the whole ecosystem. So I think it's important to look at the base layer from a holistic point of view, where the security of the base layer will affect everyone who's building on top of Ethereum. And that's hopefully what we can kind of show as well here, that this is something that benefits not only researchers or client developers and so forth, but it will actually be super beneficial and add security to every single part of the Ethereum ecosystem.
Nice. So the Ethereum Foundation and you're mostly you said you're focused on the protocol layer, let's say, right? But what's your stance on blockchain monitoring and live threat detection? What do you think about this? And does it integrate in some way with the overall security framework you're checking? What do you think?
I think it's definitely valuable. I think this is something that's kind of been existing in Web 2 for a long time in various ways. You have CMs, you have EDRs, etc., that are looking for certain patterns to detect if someone has actually gained access to something that they shouldn't be gaining access to. I think it's just natural that this is coming to Web3 as well. And the sooner you become aware of a potential breach, then the faster you can start taking action. So definitely it's an interesting area, and I'm very personally excited about that. I think there are it's easy to just think about this from a DApp layer point of view, where you would be monitoring smart contracts, etc., to figure out all of a sudden there's an anomaly being detected, and the team will start looking into that, etc. But I think this is also valuable on a protocol level point of view, where we basically can monitor for things such as chain splits and other things, or for example, if a certain client starts to consume a lot of CPU or memory or stuff like that. So it's something that the whole ecosystem should probably be looking.
Yeah, I agree. So the future of the security in Ethereum, right? Which are the main challenges Ethereum faces according to the evolving roadmap that we have, right? What do you think
Yeah.
that to summarize it? Which are the ones that you mostly care about?
Yeah, so I think if we talk about challenges, I think the primary challenge is the fact that I think if you had asked me maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I would probably have said something like there aren't enough people in Web3 security, as in enough people that are looking into dApps and stuff like that. But I think that has completely shifted today. I think there are a lot of people and a lot of very, very talented people who are focusing their time and effort on that. But I think we are still behind when it comes to the protocol security stuff. I think we need to expand that, because the more Ethereum grows, the more potential adversaries there's gonna be. And if you want to cause a big effect, then it's probably of course you can take a dApp project down or whatever by compromising it. But if you wanna do something big, if you can take the protocol down by finding out a weakness in the specifications of the protocol or an implementation of the specification in certain clients, then you can potentially cause a much larger issue. For example, imagine if there's a vulnerability in one of the clients, consensus layer clients, where an attacker were able to take control of the validators. If that happened to Prism, for example, then the attacker would have access to a lot of validators, and in a sense, they would be able to hold the network hostage, because they would be controlling such a large percentage of validators, which I don't think with the current percentage they could actually do anything major, but the amount of ETH they could potentially get slashed would be huge, and that would probably cause a lot of effects. Like, what would the users of Prism feel about that? Like, would they be okay with having all their ETH slashed, or would they be saying we need to do a hard fork to get our ETH back? How would the community act on that? So there are a lot of uncertainties about things like that could happen. Um, I also think that there are a lot of complex things happening, a lot of complex changes being done. But security is always being taken like closely into consideration. Like right now, there are discussions about like if something is implemented, it should be made sure that it's quantum resistant, for example, so that there isn't a need in 9 years or whatever to actually do another change. So I think from that point of view, security is and has always been a good priority. But I think we need to strengthen the amount of people that actually understand how to evaluate and find issues from a protocol security point of view.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's also very important to have people that are looking also at like the economic security, the whole design, like Justin Drake or similar, that it's not always like code, right? How you can be attacked.
Like I mentioned, we do a lot of coordination, and I think that is like one of the important things that we actually do. We do like it is very important to do the manual auditing and the fuzzing and so forth, but the coordination part, I think, is it's one of the important things that we do to help others get involved in the ecosystem.
So how do you balance your daily work and technical research, right? Does it happen to you perhaps that you are with so much work, coordination, this and that perhaps you don't find the time to say, okay, I want to research on this specific thing today? And how do you try to manage it?
Yeah, so I think that's one of the very positive sides about working at the EF. To be honest, I think we are very free to do what we feel has the most positive impact. Sometimes that might be doing thing X. Sometimes it's doing thing Y, and we can make that call. Sometimes people will spend 2 months looking into some cryptographic paper, for example. And then after that, they spend 2 months auditing a BLS crypto library, for example. And then they spend 1 month after that to do some research. So it is very like, what do you want to do and what do you feel is important? But I guess it's very hard. You can't, at least I can't do it, like do this swap multiple times a day or even daily. Like I tend to focus on a specific area for a few weeks at a time, and then I kind of shift to another one once I feel like I've exhausted this specific thing. And that's, I would say, how we work in protocol security overall.
Great. We have 2 more questions. Do you think that programming is a necessary skill in order to be a blockchain security researcher? And what path would you recommend to someone interested in blockchain security in case he's not, for example, a programmer, he or she?
I don't think you have to have worked as a programmer in order to become good at security. But I think you need to have an interest in it, and you need to know programming, and you need to know the issues with programming. So, as a security researcher, you might not be programming on a daily matter, but you probably should be able to if you wanted to. If I were to give a suggestion, I would say that find something that you find interesting and try to build it. Probably the easiest way to do it. Like I've always done some programming, but I haven't like been a super programmer or such. But then after I left Blizzard, I wanted to create my own MMORPG. So I made this game called Tale of Toast, and I made that together with a friend. I knew everything. Well, I didn't know everything, but I had the skills about like what is needed in order, like what are the building blocks of building an MMORPG when it comes to networking, client side, server side, etc. But I hadn't actually, written everything of that from scratch. But because I felt like I wanted to do this was something that I had as a passion. I just sat down and, for a few years I worked on that as a side project just for fun. And, I became good at, understanding what are the risks with server side programming, with client side, with networking, etc. And that kind of gave me a big holistic view of how to think about security. Because if you only think about one part, imagine if you're, I don't know, a front-end developer, then security risks that you think about are probably completely different than those of a back-end engineer. So I guess it's more about finding some project that you think would be interesting to do and just do it. I think that's the easiest way to learn. If you want to kickstart a security career, then there are a lot of different resources in Web3 that can help do this, especially with Solidity. There is Securium, and I'm sure there are other damn vulnerable DeFi and other things that you can kind of do to kind of understand it. But
Cyphering also, the one that Patrick Collins launched. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there are a lot of good stuff like that. I mean, it would be extremely hard, I think, if you don't have any programming experience at all, and then you're gonna start auditing Solidity contracts all of a sudden. I think that would be hard. You need to have some understanding about it. But the way you get there is, I think it's completely different for everyone. Some people want to read a book, some people want to see a video series, some people just want to do by learning. So I think it's, personally, I'm in the learning by doing field, so it's different, I think. The important thing is to find what works for you and then do it.
Yeah, totally. And to enjoy what you're doing. So my last question, which are your favorite conferences and events? And do you plan to go to one this year, to one or two?
Yeah, so if we talk about, I guess, conferences, I think my favorite is probably DevConnect, because I really like the breadth of DevConnect and it brings so many people together. DevCon is obviously also a favorite of mine. When it comes to, let's say, the ones, they have different aspects, right? Some of them, like DevConnect, they're mostly it's like being shot with a shotgun of ideas, basically. There are so many things coming. It's and you're speaking to hundreds of people, and when after DevCon or DevConnect, I'm just exhausted personally. There's so much information, so many new faces, meeting old friends and stuff like that, which is super great. But I also like these kind of smaller get-togethers that happens. The client teams have this thing called the Interop, which happens, I guess, about once a year, where people from the client teams to come together, work on getting as much done as possible during the hard fork. For the hard fork, collaborate. People that very often talk online, but then they actually have time to at the Interop they actually meet face to face, and it's very interesting to see what happens when people meet face to face and the ideas that kind of blossom out. And I love doing these things, but there are so many of them, and it takes so much time to do it. But it's certainly something I personally love attending.
Yeah, and I agree that what happens with some of these conferences or events is that you have so much information that is like a brain overflow. And then sometimes when you have some smaller gatherings, you can go more deeply into less stuff, right? To make a focus. So I think that both are important. Yeah. Okay, Frederik, we have talked about lots of stuff. Is there something else or anything else that you'd like to add for any security researcher listening to this right now?
Maybe to kind of to look at what other interesting areas there might be. Like I mentioned, I think there are a lot of people in Web3 that are focusing on Solidity right now, which I think is great. But I also think there are different areas of the Web3 ecosystem that are, at least as interesting. And I think stepping out of the comfort zone and looking at those things would be super great. I am, if people have suggestions on like how can we make it easier for people to transition into protocol security, or what kind of resources they want to have, etc., I'm always super keen to hear about that, because we, in the end, what we are trying to do is secure the Ethereum ecosystem and make Ethereum a secure place for the projects that are being deployed on it and users that are using it. So the more suggestions we have, the better we can hopefully build it. So yeah, very happy to receive any type of feedback that people are willing to give.
Okay, excellent. Well, it has been a great time. We talked about lots of stuff, so I really want to thank you for your time. And thank you. So thanks everyone who has been listening to us too. So we'll see soon.
Yeah, thank you, Pablo. It was great. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, this has been the episode 14 of the Blockchain Security Series with Frederik Svantes, Security Research Lead at the Ethereum Foundation. See you everyone soon. Thank you very much. Bye, Frederik.
Blockchain Security Series, the podcast where the future of Web3 security unfolds. Presented by pablito.eth.